Chapter 18 Shadow on the Walls. My first thought was that my eyelids had been glued. I tried to open them, but they resisted me. Then I accepted the fact that my lids were just too heavy. It was all too much of an effort. One's mind does exhibit strange quirks. I knew not where I was, or how long I was slated to be anywhere. And at this low point of my existence I suddenly, as though guided by a mystical power, found myself following the path of logic. It was all wrong. Everything was wrong. And it had been from the beginning. Not our being taken by Chu Sanfu, but before that, the coming of the now dead agent Crothers to our chambers had been the beginning, of course. And his mention of the name of our arch-enemy had been the first alert. The additional information supplied by Mycroft Holmes had sketched the outlines on the canvas of the case. And then Deetz's appearance at our door had added revealing brush strokes. Holmes, with his usual brilliance, had joined the two cases into one, but from that point it was as though we had been led by the Gnosis. He had anticipated the taking of the sacred sword, but, to my astonishment, had allowed the theft to be committed, and now this religious relic was in the hands of the enemy. We had preceded Chu Sanfu to Venice, but had allowed him to depart from the Jewel of the Adriatic with his accomplice, Emery Max, while we followed a Will o' the Wisp to Berlin. Holmes had outdone himself again by deducing the unknown grave in the Valley of the Kings, and we had routed Chu's henchmen guarding the place. But again we had vacated the field none the better, as far as I could see, for our triumph. Holmes had indicated on the train back from Luxor that he had finally secured whatever information he had been seeking, but upon our return had not availed himself of the considerable forces at his beck and call, but had instead taken off with none but me at his side, walking full tilt into a trap. Was this the work of he who was hailed as the finest mind in England? The Anglo-Saxon had been accused of insatiable curiosity and sometimes of flight of fancy, but at this moment it was the practicality inherited from my staunch forebears that intruded itself forcibly on my thoughts. Watson, I thought, you are naught but Bobus Britannicus. For years your claim to fame has been that of biographer, and has your inimitable friend ever let you down? It is he who is the master of logic, not you. If, as Holmes had generously stated, it has been your faith that has spurred him on, then stand fast. Remember Wellington's men at Waterloo? What of Nelson's sailors at Trafalgar? Did they lack faith, as that immortal sea dog got himself shot to ribbons on the road to glory? Stand fast. My eyes opened in more ways than one. I was lying on a pallet and looking at the slats of what was evidently a bed above me. It was a double bunk, singularly an arrangement much used on a man of war. Aside from a slight giddiness, my principal feeling was that of guilt at the path my thoughts had been following. Logic indeed. I had been drugged in some manner and had been suffering mental aberrations as an after effect. Any doctor could diagnose that. With a groan, I swung myself to the floor and assumed a sitting position. Ah, Watson, you have rejoined the land of the living. How welcome were the familiar tones of my friend, and my bleary eyes located him beside a barred window that, along with a door mounted on metal hasps, seemed the only openings to the limited area that surrounded us. Where are we, Holmes? In a cell, considerably removed from the ground level. As he spoke, Holmes was actively engaged in some manner at the window, and I stumbled to my feet to lend what assistance I could. "Rest easy, old friend, until you regain your equilibrium," said the sleuth. He had a piece of timber between two of the bars and was using it as a lever. There was a strained sound to his voice, and the muscles of his arms and shoulders were tight under his jacket. I well recalled that day in '83 when my friend had straightened out the steel poker, bent into a curve by the villainous Grimsby Roylott with one sudden effort. I knew the strength he was exerting. Suddenly he relaxed with a smile. This is an ancient structure, and I sense that I am making some progress with these bars. But a moment, Watson, and we shall try together. Where did you? One of the slats on the bed, he replied, anticipating my question and gesturing with the wooden piece in his hand. Whereas the passage of years decreases the strength of masonry, seasoning increases that of wood. I judge this slat has supported the backs of many prisoners in years long gone by. I was looking out of the window now and could see that we were 4 stories up at the top of the building. I noted Holmes's scarf attached to one of the bars and saw that it fluttered limply in the occasional wind that fanned our place of captivity. Suddenly my eyes blurred, and I had to rub them for a moment and shake my head before they came back into focus. When I saw Chu San Fu and his infernal phial of crystals, I was able to grasp some untainted air and did not receive the full shock of the gas he subjected us to, explained Holmes. What did the beggar use? Haven't the faintest. The Chinese are an ancient race, and I imagine they have a few tricks that our pharmacies, for all their modern developments, might find of interest. Our laboratories as well. Holmes was rubbing his thin, amazingly strong arms, and his manner, to anyone not used to his calm acceptance of adversity, would have been infuriating. I found it reassuring. Look here, if you think we can budge one of those bars, I'm ready for action, but considering our height from the ground, it seems like labor lost. A possible exit of any kind could be helpful. Here, old chap, let us give it a go. I was able to position my hands over Holmes's and we put our backs to it. I could feel the iron bar shifting slightly. Then the veins in my friend's forehead stood out for a brief moment, and there was a grating sound. Enough, Watson, we have it. I was puffing and gasping, but the lower part of one bar was disengaged from its long resting place and was free. A moment more and Holmes had the top of the round metal piece loose as well, and was hefting it in his hand. Iron is a formidable weapon. The age of copper and brass was the golden one for Egypt. When the Hittites appeared with iron weapons, the great decline set in. You have some plan for our escape? At the moment, no. Our incarceration came as a surprise. I was counting on Ch18's overweening ego to keep us on the scene, if only to tell us how clever he is. Then you expected to be captured. Always a possibility, Watson. One that occurred to you as well, but you followed my misguided footsteps nonetheless. Dear, loyal friend. For a brief moment Holmes regarded me with that half smile that in others might have seemed supercilious, but I divined his thoughts and was deeply touched by them. "Well," I said with buoyed spirits, "if we can remove one bar, two should not be beyond our capabilities." But it took us another 5 minutes, and hard labor it was, before we had the second bar out of the window. "What now?" I asked, taking in deep breaths of air. "We would need wings to go out the window, so we have little choice but to await what fate has in store for us. However, it is not such a terrible situation. Obviously, Chu has us removed to this cell because other matters claimed his undivided attention. I suspect that sooner or later he will order us brought to his presence to gloat a bit before he gives his henchmen the high sign to do us in. The Chinaman has all the instincts of an Oriental despot, and if born in another time, would wish himself to be no less than a mandarin." Holmes indicated the door to our cubicle. "You will note the barred gate, Watson. I tested that while you were still unconscious. Should a guard drop by to check on our behavior, I've thought in mind you might be attempting to maneuver your way through the window. If he were to enter to prevent an escape, and I were behind the door, I could certainly cosh him with one of these iron bars." I was gazing at him in astonishment, entranced by the ingenious escape plan that he had rattled off in his matter-of-fact manner. Then he shook his head. "It's a thin reed, Watson, forced on me by the chill wind of desperation." "But why? Sounds like a capital idea to me." "If the man or men have any sense, they will not enter this cell without both of us plainly visible. Possibly Chusanfu is served by idiots, but I doubt it. Like calls to like." "That went past me, Holmes. The Chinaman has rallied the remnants of his once considerable underworld empire in this last-ditch effort. He must be using a considerable amount of what we might call local talent. I'll wager that from the bazaars and low haunts of Cairo he has secured the most accomplished of these scoundrels at hand. Possibly my scheme should be abandoned in the hopes that we will be taken to Chu, and can wreak some havoc in the ranks of the ungodly then." As my friend mused, I had crossed to the door and was peering out of the window, grating into the dark corridor beyond. I never did learn if Holmes decided to try this scheme or not, for suddenly there was a voice. It was close. It did not come from the corridor, and I wheeled round as it did not, as though I had received an arrow in my posterior, half expecting to find some form that had materialized in our cell. But there was only Holmes, and I must say he looked as amazed as I felt. Holmes, you is in there? Nich war? The voice was low in tone, almost a whisper, but its timbre gave it a carrying quality. Wildly, I looked round the cell for some flue or vent, but could locate none. Come, Verenter, und help me get into this here, please. My friend had sprung to his feet and rushed to the window. As I followed in his wake, he cautioned me back. Watch the door, Watson. An intrusion at this time would be inconvenient. I obeyed him promptly, my mind in a whirl. The voice came from outside the window. Holmes had said we couldn't get out of there without wings. How, then, could anyone get in? I stole a quick glance from my station at the grate and saw Holmes pulling a thin, wiry form through the opening. There was something strange about his appearance, and for the moment I could not divine what it was. But help was at hand, and with considerable effort I forced myself to gaze into the corridor and listen intently so that I could warn Holmes if anyone approached. How is it without, Watson? No sign of light, no sign of sound either. Then I guess we are safe for the moment. Whether Holmes meant that I could abandon my post or not, I did not know, but I could not help returning to the center of the room. Such was my curiosity regarding this most unusual happening. Our visitor was removing strange-looking, rubberized objects that were attached to his hands with a glove arrangement. I noted that there were similar devices on both knees and on his feet as well. "Who are you, sir?" I stammered. "Zo, who else could climb up here? 4 flights and flat as a Fanchuan. Pretty good job, if I say so myself." "Shadow Shady!" exclaimed Holmes, and his smile was half mirth and half admiration. "The only man who can walk up walls." "Well, maybe not their only one, but their only one in Cairo." "But what are you doing in Egypt?" I heard the word I heard the words, but didn't realize I was saying them. I was so amazed. "It's their payoff," was Shady's reply, as though he were discussing the price of a mutton chop. "You go to der Klinker and see you, mein son, and I don't know what you say to him, but der word is out. He is gonna be all right up here in der noggin." The famous thief was tapping his forehead, and there was the light of excitement in his deepest brown eyes. "Dey is sticking him in der booby hatch because he ain't got all his stuff upstairs, but now he is making big recovery. Dose doctors, dey don't know what to think, but dey is letting him out from der nut farm." "I wondered about that," said Holmes. Then Heinrich Hobley is your son. What kind of detective is you? You should have known that right along. Shadow Shady is their only man what can walk up walls. So you think some clunker is coming along? What can do it? Nay, he is my son. It's in their genes. That's how he done it. Such was the conviction and intensity of the thief's words that he did set me back on my heels. But then he paused for a moment and continued in a more reasonable tone. But I will tell you this: work hard he must have to master this technique. This kind of thing, it is not simple. Well, said Holmes, and his calm acceptance of this strange story did grate on my nerves a bit. I'm delighted to learn that your son has regained his sanity, but that still doesn't explain your opportune presence in Cairo. Shady regarded him suspiciously. U.S. Sherlock Holmes? No. The sleuth's upraised palm halted more words from the German. Wait, you told me the payoff. Inasmuch as young Heinrich is now safe, sane, you feel an obligation to Dr. Watson and myself and followed us to Cairo. Now that's the kind of deductions what I'm expecting from you. There was a glint of humor in the second-story man's eye. Then I'll accept one more. It was you who followed Dr. Watson when he visited the native quarter before, in a dark alley not far removed from this place. You sandbagged a giant Manchurian who had captured him. About Manchurians I don't know, but he was a big fellow, and he was a Chink. Holmes, how did you ever figure that out? I blurted. Oh, come now, Watson. Who ever heard of flower pots in Cairo? You know we can carry this lucky star thing of yours just so far. I did bridle a bit, I must confess. That's all very well, Holmes, and we've had a nice discussion. But how are we going to get out of here? Mr. Shady may be able to walk up halls, but I don't think he can walk through that door there. That's a fact, admitted the German. Now, there is good reason to feel the plan we discussed will work, Watson. The advent of our welcome ally here will allow both of us to be in view and seemingly harmless. Suddenly the sleuth tensed and his head cocked to one side in the familiar manner that indicated his abnormally acute sense of hearing was at work. "Quick!" he whispered. "Over the window, Watson." I understood his intent immediately. From the window I would be in full view of anyone looking in through the grate in the door. Also, my form would conceal the fact that the bars had been removed. As I crossed to the aperture, Holmes handed one of the iron bars to Shadow Shady and indicated in dumb show for the German to stand where the open door would conceal him. Evidently he did not have to signal Shady what to do with the bar at his disposal. In another moment Holmes had joined me by the window. Rather glad I fastened this neckpiece, since it signaled our cell to Shady, he said in a calm voice, his dexterous fingers unknotting the material which he placed in a coat pocket. I could hear the footsteps that had alerted Holmes plainly, and then a face peered through the grate. Whoever it was played a lantern through the opening and into the room, and its rays rapidly found the both of us by the window. There was an exchange of Arabic from without, and then the sound of a key in the lock. The lantern remained trained on us unwaveringly. The door was opened with confidence, and the man with the lantern entered first. After him came another Arabian with an ominous-looking Mauser automatic that he held with a familiar air. I was surprised to see one of his race with a handgun, since cold steel is their most natural weapon. But Holmes had said that Chu would have recruited the most proficient of the ruffians available. As the man with the gun gestured towards us, Holmes stepped forward as though to speak, and suddenly his right foot came up. The toe of his shoe caught the wrist of the Arab, and the Mauser spun into the air. There was a clunk in the background, and the lamp fell to the floor, followed by a body. The gunman's mouth opened, but before he could utter a cry of pain or alarm, there was another soft clunk, and his eyes rolled as he fell like a wet sack of grain, joining his comrade on the hard floor. It had been but the work of a moment, and the resultant sounds had been inconsequential. The door was open, our guards were unconscious, and we were free. Holmes retrieved the lamp from the floor with a sweep of his arm, and then he had the Mauser as well. "We're going down, Shady. This place is crawling with Chusanfu's people. I think we can consider your payoff as made in full, so if you want to leave the way you came, why not?" "I could do that," replied Shady, "but Dot, there is a German gun what you got, and I know how to use it." Holmes tossed the Mauser to the thief, who caught it effortlessly. "You are so good at following people, best to lag behind. If Watson and I are apprehended, they won't be looking for a third man." "So I'm the race up their hole. Well, we give it a try."